So this is a list of Amazon Ring doorbell and Alexa Echo devices that come with Amazon Sidewalk enabled. And that means that these devices are actually taking your internet and sharing it with strangers.
What?
No kidding. Now, when all of these devices in a neighborhood and a city and a country all come together, they make up a nationwide mesh network. Now, this network currently is used for things like Amazon Tile, but it's a big part of Amazon's future logistical system because this network can be used to track tags and boxes and other low-powered Amazon applications of the future. Now, to be fair, this network isn't like sharing your Wi-Fi password. It does have a layer of encryption and it's a much lower bandwidth kind of network. So in theory, it's not much of a security risk. And they also limit your bandwidth to 500 megabytes, so half a gigabyte per month. However, they're still sharing the internet that you paid for. Although you can turn it off, they're doing it by default, which in my book means they're doing it without asking. But actually, my biggest concern is just that I love the idea of a nationwide mesh network that's owned by citizens, and I don't want it to be in the hands of a big monopoly. I'm worried that Amazon, by building this network and it being proprietary, is going to mess with the fundamental growth that the Internet of Things is supposed to have. So, in this tutorial, I want to talk to you about this and some of the open source alternatives to creating a LoRa network besides ones that are owned by big corporations. Now, this system is actually meshed together using something called the Helium Network, which is not owned by a single corporation. Anybody can build on top of this network to build the Internet of Things for everyone. So these devices also mesh together across the entire country to create a low-power, long-range LoRa network. But because it's open source, anybody can contribute to the future of the Internet of Things, and it actually incentivizes its users with cryptocurrency to participate instead of tricking participants into joining the network by putting a default setting on, putting piece of hardware in another device that somebody bought for a different reason, like the way Amazon is doing it. Now, in this educational tutorial, I want to talk about these Helium miners, which are also gateways for a LoRa network. But before I do, I want you to know that the incentive mechanism for participating in this network is a cryptocurrency, which means it's a risky asset, and this is not investment advice. I'm just explaining it for educational purposes. I have no affiliation, and to tell the truth, the amount of money that I spent on this, I will probably never make back with those tokens, and I don't want to encourage anyone else to do that. So just think about it from the point that you want to participate in a large network. I bought this out of curiosity. I like the idea of mesh networks coming together and citizens in a country providing the infrastructure that only really large monopolies and governments have been able to provide in the past. Okay, so these are the Helium gateways. Now, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. I don't recommend a particular brand or anything. They're essentially glorified Arduino boards, but you can't put them together completely from scratch on your own because they need to be certified by the Helium Foundation. So you take this, you plug it into the wall, then you plug it into an antenna. Some of the other devices come all kind of wrapped in one, and then you connect it to your internet through an app. So you'll Bluetooth connect to the device, then you'll give it credentials for your Wi-Fi, and then it will connect the two. So what it's doing is connecting to your internet, sharing that internet, and connecting to other people's devices who are all doing the same thing. That's how it meshes together. And when all these devices do connect together, you get an incredible amount of countrywide coverage that anybody can build the Internet of Things on top of. And I hope that a lot of people start setting up gateways like this because imagine once they're meshed together, think of the real world solutions like weather measurements, dog collars, mouse traps, emergency response, object tracking, and so many more use cases that I can't even imagine yet. And when they do, this little thing should be rewarding the people who have actually provided the network. Instead of having one big company like Verizon or AT&T, all of the individual citizens should get paid on the amount of hardware that they provide to the network. Even if it's just these tokens, at least you're getting some kind of a reward, some kind of an incentive for the effort you're putting in to provide your piece of the overall infrastructure. Now, setting up the hardware was pretty easy. I basically followed the prompts that the app gave me. When they say they're low powered, these devices will probably take about 5 watts of power per month. So it ends up being about 50 cents in electricity. Okay, so now let's talk about the way that you're incentivized. This is called proof of coverage. So this is different from what most cryptocurrencies use to unify their ledger. Now, Helium doesn't use proof of stake like Ethereum or proof of work like Bitcoin. It uses what's called proof of coverage. And this is why it's interesting to me. This is a whole different concept. But before I go into the details, if you would take a second, just hit subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I am dying to get this channel above 1,000 subscribers. So that would really mean a lot to me. Okay, now back to proof of coverage. So each month, there's approximately 5 million of these little tokens, these cryptocurrency HNT tokens that are just invented out of thin air and given to everybody on the network. So imagine your city full of these, right? Say there's 1,000 of them scattered all around your city, different people's households. So the challenger hotspots are randomly chosen. So it's simply a roll of the dice. Imagine all of these hotspots are basically like lottery tickets, and then multiple times throughout the month, one of them is randomly chosen. And it's chosen to essentially beacon who it is and where it is. It says, hey, here I am. It shoots out some information from this antenna saying, hey, I was randomly chosen. This is where I'm located. Who's around me? 5% of those new tokens are going to go to the transmitter. So it's going to pick somebody that it can see, and it's going to talk to them and say, hey, here I am. So the random choice happens every 200 blocks. Now, 5% of those 5 million tokens are actually going to go to the transmitters. So the randomly chosen beacon is going to say, here's all of the other gateways that I can see. And some of that reward is going to go to all of them for responding to his, hey, here I am. And they say, oh. So then 5% of those tokens are actually going to go to the other transmitters that can see the chosen beacon. So this one says, hey, here I am. And all the other ones are like, hey, here I am, here I am, here I am. And they get the other 5% of the 5 million tokens. But that's only 6% of all of those tokens. Now, the majority of the reward tokens actually go to the witnesses. So these are the other nodes that can see you talking to them. So I imagine like at a party, you know, like a guy and a girl lock eyes and they sort of connect with one another. You know, they meet each other, they start talking. But then like all the other people at the party are kind of like listening and side-eyeing, being like, ooh, let's see how this works. This guy's trying to like approach that girl. Let's see, are they vibing on each other? They're all kind of listening in on that conversation. Those people listening, those are the ones that are earning the vast majority of these tokens. So when you're placing your gateway, using my analogy, you want to be the listener, but you don't want to be too close. And just like in the party example, you don't want to be like in their personal space where it feels like you're supposed to be part of that conversation. And that's the same with these. So if you're within 300 meters of another, then you're too close. As you get closer and closer, you'll have a diminishing amount of rewards. However, sometimes you still want to get kind of, awkwardly close to another gateway because there's so many more in that area to listen to. So, you've really got to balance it when you think about where to place these things. You want a dense area because there's lots of people to listen to, but you don't want to be too close to people even though you're in a dense area. So the next thing to understand is that the reward percentages do change over time. Now, right now you're getting rewarded for adding devices to the network more so than the amount of data that's going through them, but in the future you'll get rewarded more for how much it's used, not so much where it's located. So for the next 2 years, it's about how can you add a device to this network, and then later it's really about where do you want to position it in the sense that you think someone might use it a lot. Think about the Internet of Things and what kind of devices will actually be on it in the future and where are those going to be located. So that could mean a bustling downtown where there's a lot of packages and a lot of mouse traps, maybe dog collars, all of these things that are sending data over the network. Or maybe that means you're out in a rural area, but it's a farm where you know that every tree has a measurement device on how tall it is, and it's measuring how much water there is in the soil. And all of these devices don't have enough gateways, so you put yours up and a lot of data flows through it. So how do you go about placing these things if you want to maximize the token rewards? Well, there's a few different variables to consider. So a good place to start is Uber's white paper, where they talk about how hexes are glued together. But the Helium Foundation is actually using the same system, because the same way that Uber is concerned about having cars and complete coverage in cities, we're concerned with making sure that there's long-range, low-power networks across the entire city in the same way. It's also just cool to see how the hexagons come together. Like, I don't know why it seems sort of fun, but it's like a little beehive, because you kind of zoom in and you get a higher resolution hexagon, and then you pull out and the hexagons fit inside the other hexagons. So you get this different resolution depending on how zoomed into the map you want to be. So when you're thinking about how many more devices are around me, you look at the hexagon and you say, oh, at this resolution, there might be 5, but you pull out and all of a sudden there's 30, right? So you might have this weird system where you're getting some rewards because you're kind of by yourself on a low resolution, but on a higher resolution, you're jam-packed, or vice versa. So you need to go to the map and actually think about where you want to place these and check ahead of time. And you might just find out that you'll make more reward tokens if it's up on the northern end of your property or down on the southern end. You just don't know until you look at the map and see where everyone else has already located theirs. Now, you can actually learn about this by just going to their website. You can click on the Explore tab, and then you can go look at how the hexes are broken down in your area. And besides density and resolution, you also need to think about the shape, the arc that your antenna actually makes. Okay, so all of these antennas will be described by a dBi. Now, I made the total amateur mistake of thinking that the higher the dBi is, the more powerful the antenna is. That is not how it works. dBi actually stands for decibels, but it actually describes the shape or the coverage cone that it will broadcast and cover. So when you have something like a 3 or 4 dBi antenna like this one, you get more of like an umbrella type shape that goes over the top of it. And as you go up to like a 5 or 6 dBi antenna, you become much more direct. So the way to think of it is, imagine a flashlight. If you were to pull it back and it had a very broad spectrum and then you kind of moved it up and focused it into more like a laser, that's the difference between going up and down dBis on these antennas. And look, if you're up really high in a building and you just want to laser over most of the city, then that's the kind of antenna that you want. But if you're kind of like surrounded by hills and you need to get up and over them and get to your neighbors on the other side of the mountain, you don't want to go through the rock with a laser. You want to go umbrella over it, because then the dome coverage will actually be able to see more of these devices for you to listen to, and that's where the tokens come from. So you need to think about density, you need to think about which devices you can listen to, you need to think about how close you are to another device so it doesn't diminish your rewards. You also need to think about the shape of the antenna. But you put all those things together, you can figure out, in theory, how much token this can actually provide. So finally, let's talk about tokenomics. Now, there's a 223 million HNT token max supply. There will never be any more than that. It also has a 2-year halving schedule. Like before, when I said there's 5 million of these generated each month, that will go in half. So 2.5 million per month in 2 years. And every 2 years after that, it will drop and drop and drop. Until eventually, the 223 million is the final number, and then no more will be generated. Now I'll introduce to you another token, because this is how all these crypto things work. But HNT is a token that fluctuates in value. But when you actually want to send data over this network, you have to take one of those HNT tokens and convert them into a new token called a data credit. Now, 100,000 data credits should be pegged to the US dollar. So they say that for $1, you always get 100,000 of these data credits. And also, each data credit is equal to 24 bytes of information. So that means that $1 of data credit should give you 2.4 megabytes of data that you can transmit across the network. So basically right now you get rewarded by these HNT tokens that are invented out of thin air. But when that stops, people will actually have to pay if they want their dog collar to communicate. So if you want to put $1 into basically your dog collar, and then you want to track where your dog is in case it runs away, the constant information that it's sending is going to be based on these 24-byte data credits. I also found it interesting that big companies like the Dish Network are thinking about different ways to add LoRa devices into their satellite dishes, because now they say, hey, let me put this satellite dish up at your house, but by the way, it will also generate a little bit of token for you. And if that token can be converted to USD, then, you know, it either lowers your Dish TV bill, or maybe it even gives you the internet for free one day. I also saw that the Mayor's Office of Technology in San Jose was actually distributing these to volunteers who were citizens and businesses in the area, just to see if they could build something that was of value. And I don't know if it'll work or not, but I love that idea, because if we can be in a future where there's a universal basic income, maybe it's not because people do nothing, but maybe it's because the service they're providing is something like this. There's big infrastructure projects, especially data projects that can scale well, and you know, people host these things on their house, and they're providing a physical location where a company like Verizon or AT&T would have to buy a plot of land and put up a big cell tower. And, you know, it just gets expensive, and it's not so easy for them to get into people's houses and figure all this out. So, you know, let the citizens do it. So I don't mean to hype this project up, because I cannot promise that it's going to be anything worth it in terms of an investment. But when it comes to the chicken and egg problem, like why we haven't had the Internet of Things, it just bothers me. Like, we were promised it so long ago, and there really is a use case, but the hard part is getting the flywheel going, the chicken or egg system. And maybe if cryptocurrencies can help us get over that hump, then I'm a fan. All right, so if you like this kind of content or don't like it, let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. It would really help me. Like I said, I'm trying to get above 1,000 subscribers. It's gonna happen one day. I just keep pushing along. And hopefully you have a curious future. Dude, is that my tagline? Curious future? You have a curious future. That's cheesy. That's cheesy.